So, Chris, why don't you share with us some of your observations and help us get our brains synced up on this. And one of the goals is to find the big, powerful takeaways and to have a dialogue.
Borrow technology from you. Thank you. So if I just present my 3 slides, I'll be finished in 3 minutes. I don't think that was the intent. I don't know how you see this, Ken, but I think I'll invite you to turn some of these things into questions or discussion for the audience. And if we can just talk 20 minutes about every slide, we can fill an hour. So everything is possible, I guess. So as you've seen, I did not intervene this morning, did I? But because I've been carefully listening, and I was also here the whole morning. I'm sorry, Doc and some others that I missed because I had to get out for a conf call. So there's a couple of things that I may have missed. I wasn't here last year. I actually had a problem with my flights the year before, so I missed, I think, DaS last year and the year before, but I've been here a couple of times before. And DaS is like the morning of philosophical discussion before we all go to see technology suites and tool demos and talk about very intricate, complex technology-related issues about BIM and PLM and other stuff and whatever and so forth. But somehow it did strike me this morning that we should move the conversation here maybe from, the easygoing philosophical conversation to practical implementation. And of course there is examples. I mean, you started the morning with talking about your building and things like that. It's not that there is not examples, but I think it was nice, Jack, that you ended with your talk on this, right? One of the first things you said, it's not about what we say at conferences, it's about what we practice. And maybe, I don't know if this will continue to exist as a symposium or whether it will be rolled into COFAs or whether it will take on another existence. But really one of the things I think is that this should maybe become more, not presentations, but a conversation about how we put things into practice, how we can share examples of how things have been put into practice in our different industries, but not so much in terms of sharing the examples and talking about it, but in terms of mentoring and coaching and something else, I think. It was just an idea, but I don't know if this idea is shared by any or by you.
Now I have the mic. What do you guys think? I mean, I love having a philosophical conversation, especially with this group, but what do you think about this question? How do we take and move towards practical implementation? Stand up and introduce yourself, please.
John Miller, Durban Group. Just a note of caution, the old adage, never solve problems in a meeting. Kind of comes to mind. I understand that you do have to get down to brass tacks at some point, but there's always that danger of, like, I think we're looking for the long goal and trying to solve and be practical and maybe give examples of, like, who here has done this would be an interesting thing that gets people's brains spinning about, well, he did that, maybe I could implement this piece of it in my process or something like that. But actually trying to solve the problems here, I think would be counterproductive and frustrating.
Well, I think that's a good observation. And the goal really is to just have the conversation and find new insights like that very one there. Because it is hard to make decisions in meetings. I spend a lot of time in meetings.
I would just go back to a little bit of the conversation we had before, that if in fact you create customer demand for sustainable products, sustainable buildings, then and make it part of their buying process, that's probably the strongest lever that you have. And a way to do that is to expose the information. Great company, Caterpillar and Deere, they define life cycle costs in a relatively narrow thing. You could sell your used one. You had maintenance and things like that, HP and computers. If you just expand that definition to include life cycle costs that include carbon and the other things that we want about that, and make it a simple, clear metric for customers, I think that it'll be a far easier sell. It'll be easier to make the right decisions. And while it's true that the software, I mean, I can't really predict the life cycle cost of a window with you know, 3-digit place accuracy, but I can at the very earliest stages go, well, there's disposal, there's installation, there's thermal efficiency. I can come pretty close and come within an order of magnitude, and then you know, 2 decimal. I mean, and make those decisions. And so and you know, Buffett says he loves companies with a moat. I mean, there's a little bit of things there, but if in fact it takes a great deal of skill and capability and knowledge to be the low-cost producer. And if you are one of the 2 or 3 companies in a market can do that, you will win. And so I think maybe that's a path forward for some of this stuff.
Very good comment. And I think if there was a key theme that we've been hearing today, it's sort of about not having too much detail, that we can make these bigger decisions earlier in the process with just large sort of senses of judgment if we have the right kind of knowledge in the room, and we can bring it to bear early. Brian?
I think it was on the slide before, okay? To go from, you know, philosophical to practical. Try something. Something small. Just try something. See if it works. Okay? It's amazing how much you learn by just doing something. And, you know, if it fails, okay. Try something else. Look at why it failed, as opposed to just, oh, yeah, well. You know, navel gazing doesn't get you very far, other than dusty navel.
So does anyone have a story where they themselves moved from the philosophical to a practical implementation, or in a strategic incrementalism sort of way?
Well, at the risk of stating the obvious in terms of power of software, which, not being a software company, one of the reasons I'm here is we were having philosophical conversations with clients about why sustainability needed to be part of this. But until we put it in a tool and projected that tool on the wall and got decision makers in a room and said, we are now going to score these things on a simple scale, but it's there. It's one of the things we're doing. It's not the only thing we're doing. That became a practical implementation, as rudimentary and as early in the cycle as it was. And so, one small step, but it was, in one way, it was the most tangible step. And to me, the lesson I just drew from that was that, gosh, we've been thinking about this for years and writing about it and talking about it, but suddenly when it was in the tool, when I said this morning, have to trip over it, there it is. You're either going to say we don't care or we're going to do it. And from an implementation standpoint, it just seems to be a tipping point, having it in the software.
How did you get to that tipping point? In other words, how did you recognize that the tool was going to be the thing that people would trip over?
Well, it was really because we were implementing this methodology for 10 or 11 years before we even had sustainability in the tool. And we noticed that what happened when we had a tool the first time, because originally I built a tool in Excel and it wasn't for clients to ever see. They just knew that they got a nice polished PowerPoint presentation at the end, and they had no idea what I had to draw manually. The data was great, but it was Excel, you know. So the point was that once we put it in the tool, the discussions that happened because of having it in the tool were discussions that otherwise wouldn't have happened, whether we ever got data or not. And
but what was the eureka moment? You said once we got it in the tool, but the eureka moment was, let's put it in the tool. What prompted that? How did that?
Utter frustration. Okay. I have scars from biting my tongue on, you know, they're not going to talk about it until we bring it up. We're not going to do this anymore unless this is part of it. And that's actually where we are right now.
Okay. Similar activity, okay, my day job. I work over at Microsoft, a little corner in the organization where I'm basically responsible for helping re-engineer how the company works. 20 years ago, I put together sort of a portfolio system to tell them how to manage their investments, not dollar investments, but building software, putting up data centers, doing all these things. and saying that the ROI is just one factor. And you need to really kind of think about it a little bit differently. It's taken 20 plus years for it to come circling back and people saying, hey, we got to worry about this. What do we do? When I started putting up little spreadsheet bubble charts and stuff, suddenly it was like, you're onto something, let's start working this. Now, that material is now going into Microsoft Consulting for them to help customers and the like. But until you just do something in front of people, see if it works, get feedback, it's always just oh, that's a nice academic idea, what about it? You got to show where it's going to have an impact. Even if it's not a perfect impact, it's just, it looks like you're on the right path, keep going.
2 points. Number one, I think that we should convince COFES to include in the Maieutic Praetaxis session at least one surprise having to do with sustainability. So that every year some off-the-wall thought about sustainability gets briefed to the whole group. Secondly, I think this group should design a one-question survey. That question is, what's the importance of sustainability to your future business? And then we should ask each one of the companies that come to COFES to use that and survey the people who should be their customers but aren't yet, so that we can find out why or what's the opportunity for a real sustainability-oriented COFES software. What's the opportunity for that out there? Right now we focus on taking care of the customers we have. We don't think about all those customers that should be our customers but aren't. And maybe they're not because we don't say enough about sustainability. Hmm?
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
Okay. Good.
Go ahead and advance the slide.
Okay.
We'll let Peter
Pete?
throw something in here. Oh, okay.
I was just going to say, Frank Sarno with Mortensen Construction. Talking about philosophical conversation, going to practical implementation. 2 years ago, there was a conversation with Peter talking about maps of discovery and where are you going to go, and if you don't know where you're starting from, how are you going to get there? And I took that philosophical conversation back to Mortensen and trying to figure out if we're actually going to improve systems, then we need to know where we're at today, and we need to do that honestly, and we need to look at all of the ugly things in the system, present that, and then that at least opens the doors to how we're going to move forward in terms of things like, are we actually going to be able to do a paperless project? Or let's at least have some less paper when we get out there into the field. And that which opened up our eyes to really looking at how do we drive changes in behavior from craft on up to senior management. And that all stemmed from realistically one phrase that I wrote down on my pad of paper at the time, which was maps of discovery. Know where you're at and know where you're going before you try and go there. And so that all came from the conversation with Peter.
Thank you for sharing that, Peter.
I just wanted to share, you asked for some examples, and back when Jack Welch was running GE, they were one of my clients, and one of the interesting things he did, I mean, he made some mistakes like over financialization and everything, but his view is that a company could only handle one, thing at a time. And so he had number 1 or 2 market share. He had the workout process. He had the total quality thing. And his thought was that we're going to spend a whole year in dialogue, in learning, to acquire this skill, this culture, to make this part of how we do things. And it's like when I worked with Gerstner at IBM, he had like 7 things, and that for IBM was an incredible act of concentration, but it still wasn't concentrated enough for maybe long-term stuff. So anyhow, I think that if that if we want to be successful, we have to frame sustainability in a way that it deserves to be the number one thing for a company to do. I don't think we're going to get there with it's green and it's wonderful and you know you'll go to heaven for doing it, and then have the company learn how to do it over the course of a year. So anyhow, I think that's another kind of, and I remember GE because he's one of your customers too that is kind of following this way, but probably is not making sustainability number one. Maybe it is. I don't know. They're not a customer, no. But anyhow, just a thought.
Thank you, Peter. I think we are doing well on our 20 minutes slide, but I think also we touched on many things that are on the next slides already. I certainly like also the idea in what is being said that this could be maybe something more of a storytelling about things we've done and experienced and shared, and I think that would also get closer to Jack's learning ambition. I don't know if that's the right word. It's supposed to go about coevolution, and I got an email a couple of weeks ago, and there was points like the coevolution of building and sustainability, the coevolution of whatever. So I didn't use them, but I found a few which I thought were interesting. The coevolution of business and sustainability. I think, I don't know if anyone read Simon Sinek's book, but I think we need to get back to the why. Why are businesses engaging in transformations? Why are businesses reinventing themselves? And if they do, beyond traditional financial purpose, can they have a purpose of sustainability? And the examples that were just given by Peter and were mentioned are going into that direction. One thing I noted this morning was sometimes it seems we're hiding behind the difficulty. And the question can then also be, where does sustainability start? There was this diagram with the stage gates. Of course, analysis is difficult, and there is good reasons to push analysis farther down the process. But analysis means that there is something to analyze already. But basically, sustainability should start way before that. It should start with the principles that are behind the thinking of the new product or new service or new company or new whatever that we want to create. And the other point here about business and sustainability is, I don't know, I live in Europe, so I'm probably among the only one in the room, I don't know, I have no idea, but there's a lot of discussion in Europe whether the capitalist model is still going to be acceptable, survivable, or whatever, viable at least. So how about imagining shifting our focus from growth to stability, from making revenues or profits to actually being responsible for the societal impact, which was the enormous bubble that was on the slide around 10 o'clock this morning. Or from plenitude, where we have plenty of everything, to being a little bit more frugal. This is just mine, but for those interested, there's a guy and he only owns 111 things. I think he made it a principle for his life. And 111 things is not much, but it includes your glasses, it includes your pants, it includes whatever. And there's a link to that. But basically, I think it is interesting also thinking in, doing more with less and being more frugal also in our designs. I don't know, I can just go on. Does anyone have comments on these questions?
Yeah, I think the third one's excellent, but I think we should shift the focus from growth to agility. That is the ability to stay healthy regardless, because the only stable business is run by a mortician.
Yeah. Anything else? Peter?
I was going to say that the smartphone may be the most sustainable thing ever done. And you go, what? That's impossible. But I know kids today, like a young man who is a partner in a very successful web design firm, when they have no physical facilities, they don't need a building. They go to various, like they went to Japan to hike some famous trail for their last management meeting. And a kid's life today can be 111 things and a life that's lived in the phone. Their friends are there, their communications are there, their games are there, their knowledge is there, their books are there. I mean, I'm somebody with like a library of 10,000 books, but had I had to do it over again, I'd have it all on a Kindle. So there is, I mean, it really is, you know, I grew up in the age of your wealth is measured in tons of cast iron, and because I like tools, and today a kid can live a life. So that's kind of cool. I mean, there's hope there. So.
But that would count as more than your 111 items. Or each one of those counts more than, each one of those Kindle books is more than your.
Yeah, but this one device, which is, you know, it requires some energy, it's 10% of our grid to run that, but nonetheless, that is the center. I mean, a kid does not need a 6,000 square foot house and 3 cars and all the rest to have a happy life. They can have their friends, their associations, they can text when they're going to meet each other, they have access to, you know, I still have the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, how stupid is that? Because, you know, and I use Wikipedia. So I'm just saying that in a way, technology has enabled a next generation to live with a much lighter footprint. And kids are doing it today, like this 30-year-old who doesn't have an office, but is making a great living and enjoying life full.
Well, it does.
Just on that.
You did, however, say something in there that I think causes us to have to look at the bigger system of the system. I had no idea. 10% of the grid? Is that what you said?
I've been trying to get an estimate for that years, and that's the closest I've gotten, that about 10% of the grid supports all of our electronics and communication
Not just
infrastructure.
right.
But given what we get for that, that's a pretty good deal. Yeah.
It is.
And it can get better because that's the part of the grid that, because you can move it around, the internet's distributed, you can actually probably run that off of solar.
Mm-hmm.
And solar is now, you know, what, 59 cents a watt or something. I mean, so that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot that's yet to come in terms of solar.
Anecdotal, but the point about the 30-year-old without offices or whatever it was, we decided in December of last year that we didn't need offices. We're a small company. I mean, we're not a thousands of people company, but we decided basically that we didn't need offices. We were either with our clients or we were together, but we didn't need fixed offices for that. There you go.
Yeah. If we're going to live as well or better, but use a lot less, that's really what we have to learn to do as consumers. And the manufacturers and other people may not like it, but they'll have to go along with it because that's where this begins. It's with us wanting more stuff. And if you can learn to live with a lot less stuff and enjoy it, all you need is a cell phone and some clothes and something to eat. That's really stripped down compared to somebody that's got 6 condos and a yacht. And it's reducing the footprint at the consumption level that really counts. So how do we do that? Good discussion for some time. Maybe not now.
Okay. I'm lost in my slides. Okay. Society and sustainability. Because if there's business and sustainability, then there must be society and sustainability. Tesla was on, Cassandra put Tesla on a slide, at least the logo. I was wondering how much of the value of Tesla could be derived from their impacts and efforts on electric cars and a sustainable model and things like that in any way. I mean, of its enormous value, how many % of that value is actually derivable in some way from their efforts for sustainability? I mean, I think she said people like to invest their money into organizations that make a difference. I also see that there are financial institutions, again, they may be different in Europe than they are here, but we see in Europe a lot of financial institutions emerging that use money as a tool actually to address the social and the societal challenges that we face. And I think that's an interesting evolution. And also, what attracts people, the companies that are not taking the turn to sustainable ways of working, will they still be attractive for the workforce of tomorrow? I mean, are they not just going to lose the potentially best and most promising employees because those want to work for companies that make a difference or where they can feel engaged in the company's mission? So if you don't do it, you're not credible. You lose employees, you lose clients, you lose money, so you'll disappear, I guess. That would be a good thing because whatever's left will be sustainable. And then also the point raised by Jack, one of the elements is what's the model that we believe in? I mean, we do function in a capitalist model, but knowing that there are things like conscious capitalism as a movement is certainly interesting.
Before you go on, excuse me. Before you go on, I have a quick question or just a general comment. When we look at the people, and we talk a lot in this symposium every year, right? As Jack puts, it's more than just talking about in a conference. But, the millennials and the younger staff that are coming into the companies today, all right, they have some really good traits. I mean, some that irritate us, right? And that's because I'm getting old, but they have terrific digital skills, okay? I don't have to teach them how to do something. They have terrific digital skills. They have a willingness to experiment, right? Fail fast, fail quick. Let's just keep going until we find the solution, right? So they have a real willingness to experiment with what they're working on. And the last thing, which is really kind of a great trait, they could really care less about all the crap we're talking about in this room, right? They just don't, it's history, right? Yeah, we're screwing up the planet. What are we going to do to fix it? That's what they're more interested in, right? I want to associate myself with someone who does that, who has that higher purpose, who shares the same goal, the social goal that I have. And I'm wondering if we just need to get the hell out of the way. If we're not the problem, having to measure it, guide it, control it, want to make sure it has the right outcome, would it be quicker if we just stepped aside and let someone who has passionate about the problem, other than just, we're all drowning here and someone's describing the water, right? Maybe it's best just get out of the way.
So next year we can skip COFES and go to Maui?
No, we just, hey, let's try to get some younger staff. We'd like to see some younger staff.
Okay, now I'm going to acknowledge that, but then turn around and say, I remember when I started out my career decades ago, I seem to remember hearing the same thing about me doing these things in companies. This guy's he's just going to go bang his head until it gets done. Try different things. So I don't think it's about the millennials or any particular generation. Every particular generation says, them guys screwed up and I'm going to fix it. Somewhere along the line, you lose that passion or you compromise that in the name of whatever you're doing. That becomes the issue. It's a journey back to that core when you said, hey, there's a problem I'm going to fix and work on it. So it's not a millennials problem. It's not an old people's problem. It's a, as you've aged, you lose sight of what you were trying to do and say, I got to get back to that. I think you're close to the Woodstock generation. What were we all talking about then? We're going to fix it because those old people, and what happened?
Stephen, you're next, and then Cassandra, you'll go next. And then we'll come back over, who was it? Was it you, Deke? No.
Kind of a combination of a question and a comment back on the last slide when Chris was talking about hiding behind not having enough data for analysis. There's one other kind of hiding that I'm kind of curious about, and it has to do with sustainably designed software. And this may be really old hat for you guys as a software conference, but I don't hear much about it. And for example, about half of our clients are enterprise software companies, or have been. And when we first bring up sustainability, it's like, well, we don't have much of a supply chain, so we're just very sustainability oriented, but that's corporate level stuff that we're doing, and it's really important stuff. It's not about product, when in fact, as we know, the principles of sustainably designed software, you put in a lot of extra functionality with extra latency, and before you know it, if you've got tens of thousands of users, the server loads in the data center are burning X more energy, and it adds up real fast. Or can you print without images easily? You know, and what paper processes are we really replacing downstream? So with Intuit, for example, who we work with, and they take, I forget how many millions of pounds of paper, you know, out of the biosphere every year, because with 8 million small business customers, you know, you've got the scale to do it. But I still don't hear much talk, I don't mean singling out this conference, about sustainably designed software. And I wonder, am I sort of missing the stream of conversation around that, or is it just not happening that much?
Yeah, well, I was backtracking to what Brian was talking about, and first I'm going to caveat and say it's not about me comparing the millennial generation Y to the baby boomers or the prior generations, and this whole concept that, you know, you had this vision when you started your career. I think there's a big differentiator in the internet and how interconnected we are, and you see the impact of social media and what, you know, even as early as, you know, what happened in Arab Spring and what happened with the Occupy movement, and having everything available to a large group of people to track what's going on in some part of the planet, what happened on Wall Street during the Occupy movement, and what that caused for each of the younger generation to feel. And what Bernie Sanders, I mean, he was up and talking during that movement and what the 1% was. And it struck a chord in our generation. I know there was a lot going on in the earlier generations, and people were going to the White House and doing their marches on Capitol Hill, and it was extremely impactful as well. But I think there's a lot more information available for anybody who was not actually back then marching in the streets. Now we have the internet and we can do research and understand what it is. So I think there's a tiny bit more of an impact in our minds as the younger, I'm talking from the younger generation standpoint, of course. And also another thing we went through was 2008, and our parents were the ones who lost their homes to subprime or whatever the case may be. We were impacted in a certain way. And, you know, it's not stepping aside, but there's definitely value in at least listening, obviously, to the younger generation, and possibly working alongside, and maybe start, you know, if we're talking about going back to the previous slide, how to turn it practical versus philosophical, you know, maybe there's a mentorship program in COFES where you have this older generation with all these amazing insights, and you have a connection to what's happening in your industry and your sector that this younger generation doesn't have, obviously, with the expertise that you've grown over the years. So maybe that might be a solution where we can connect your insight with their way of thinking and their experience in technology.
So I was going to follow up. That's exactly kind of what I was thinking, is that come Monday, we're still going to be working and living in a system that you can't step aside from. I mean, that everyone in this room is a leader in some way in their organization or in their field. I think instead of stepping aside, I think what would really help, because this helped me early on in my career, is going and finding that person that's going to be able to make the change, this 20-something person that's, you can see energy and passion, and then coaching that person and helping that person. We can all do that come Monday and help them start driving towards that change. And I think there's a lot of energy in that in terms for us, and I'm really saying everyone that's probably a full generation older than me. There's the energy to go and talk with someone that's 25 and has a tremendous vision, but they don't know how to do it, and they don't know the red tape. They get frustrated, and we can help them realistically start making that change. And if we can make one person, then we can turn the next person, turn the next person. I think that's realistically the best thing we can do come Monday.
I just one small little point on this. I work with people from that generation, and I hear what you say about coaching them, but I can tell you the value of them coaching me is absolutely incredible. And I think the value of them being here, and I don't see them, I'm sorry. I don't see many of them, yes, and they don't have a voice, yes, but the value of them being here would be absolutely incredible. Sorry.
I agree with what Brian was saying. The kind of impact that we wanted to have when we were younger, and the kind of impact that younger folks want to have. I think the only thing that's different is the velocity. It's coming faster now because of social networking. It's coming faster now. But the kinds of things we wanted to do, we thought about doing, the idealism that's in every one of our hearts isn't any different. It's the velocity with which we absorb it and move it. And the internet has changed the velocity. That is where I see this change. I don't think that generationally there's any difference in our ideals. It is whether or not we decide to absorb the increase in velocity, and whether you understand how the depth of what we can bring to slowing down and taking the increments. Because we've made lots of mistakes because we jumped instead of slowing down. One of the things you need when the faster things go, the more patience you need. Completely opposite ends of the spectrum, but it's true. The faster things go, the more patience you need.
I'm sorry. Jack's got that next, then Doc, then we'll get to you. Sorry. It's a good problem to have, though.
To your point about the sustainable software, the one chart I showed on software integrity assessment is exactly that. It will preclude unsustainable software plant. Now, getting people to do sustainable software is a little bit more of a challenge, but we now know how to stop unsustainable software. Right? So that's something that we're really good at. And getting sustainable is tough because, for example, Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, when he realized that software bugs could cause his automobiles to crash into other things, immediately went to General Motors and others, and they went to Washington, D.C., and proposed that a law be passed that the behavior of an automobile would be the legal responsibility of the owner, not the manufacturer. So he too must be watched.
I'd hope maybe next year we could talk about some directional takeoff from all this, because we're really talking about a fundamental change in how, quote, the system works. And as long as we have a system that's driven by one stakeholder dominantly, the ownership, the investor, you got what we got. If you're going to do something different, it needs action on the ground, and it needs a different direction, and that's a different motivation, a different kind of organization, and different activity, because a lot of the people I know are not going to discuss anything much philosophically, but if there's something different to do, they'll do. That's probably the majority of people. So it's up to people here to lead the people that do, to let's do something differently, and that's the way they learn.
Okay. I'm going to leave your comment the way it was, because I think that was one of my points that I really wanted to make. I thought that was excellent. Thank you. The second thing in regard to mentorship goes both ways. I think that's really one of the things we really need to understand. And the other thing is, I look at where I was when I started out my career. I had really great mentors. Okay, companies actually had mentorship programs, whether they called it that or not. I had several of the greatest mentors in the world. Okay, this interesting little guy who came up with an idea on how to design really fast planes, Kelly Johnson. Okay, wonderful, valuable lessons from him. And IBM, a guy by the name of Mike Kutcher, who was IBM's guru on manufacturing. Jerry Weinberg, all these people spent time not because it was in their job descriptions, but because they said, hey, it's up to me to pass that on to the guy who's going to be behind me. That's something that's not been happening in organizations anymore because they didn't want to invest. It was easier to say, oh, I'll just steal an employee who already knows how to do X, Y, and Z. So bringing back that mentorship, sharing that either through a formal program or just sitting down and talking to people is now becoming more critical to pass on tribal knowledge, so to speak.
So Peter, you get the last comment before the last slide in the wrap-up, which is in about 4 minutes.
I'm not going to take 4 minutes. Evolution itself is an experimental process. A cosmic ray comes by, wipes out a gene, and we can get better at that, but experimentation really is the root of how you evolve and get better. And one of the things, I gave the high school address at my high school, and I can remember it started out, you've heard we're going to change the world, because we were the new generation then, and we were going to change the world, and it was actually a plea for experimentation. And I have to say we ran a lot of unsuccessful experiments, but nonetheless, so many of the institutions that we've left ourselves with are like straitjackets. Even my own clients, like an IBM, have gotten more rigid in how they do it. Conservatives will complain quite rightly that when you have a federal law superseding the 50 experiments in states, that there's a cost to that. That we seek standardization out of efficiency, but we lose the opportunity for quantum leaps in efficiency by reconfiguring the whole thing. So I just think that one of the things that the older generation can do, that meaning like me now, is be much more tolerant of experiments, asking only that you run them, that you measure them, and that we look at it and go, is that a better way to do things? So this tolerance of experimentation is what I'm urging here, because that really, and I guess coevolution means we got to run twice as many experiments and cross-hatch them. And
thank you. Chris?
Before we wrap up, I just want to make a tribute to our fearless leader.